Hey there, welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Karen.
And I'm Jonelle.
Each week, one of us brings a topic to the table, something we've been wrestling with, reading about, or noticing in our own lives.
And the other one reacts in real time. No scripts, no prep, just an honest conversation between a mother and a daughter spanning generations about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by bias, power, and inherited patterns.
We don't always agree, and it's not always comfortable, but we show up anyway.
Yes,
let's wake
do.
up.
Let's wake up.
Okay,
Speaking of not agreeing, that's where we ended last.
I know we do, but before we talk about that, because I do want to talk about that. Full disclosure to our listeners, and especially if you're watching us on YouTube, we are in full summer mode here. Well, Northwest summer mode, long sleeve shirts. And I'm at my cabin. So we might have dogs barking in the background. We might have a husband making too much noise. So we're going to do the best we can, but we have to be flexible here.
Yeah. So, Jonelle is in the studio still.
Yeah.
But
in the studio.
And it is funny to say because listeners, I don't know if you know, though we record side by side on the video, we face each other in person.
Yeah.
When we're recording normally. And so it is really weird to do this over Zoom with you.
Yeah.
Like not looking at you like
over
right there.
Over the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Over the thing and being engaged. So that's
well. And I was also wishing we had like a makeup artist because like my nose is red. Boy, it's just tough doing your own production, but that's okay. And I don't have makeup here at the cabin, so
no, I think you look.
Bear with me, everyone. Okay,
I think you.
Couple things. This I kind of feel funny because it's Pride Month, and I really want to lift up Pride Month. And I want to lift up spaces for our LGBTQIA people and give love. Yeah. So in our book club, which is tonight, we always record the night of that we have book club, is definitely geared in that space. Next month's book club is Persepolis. So it'll be the second week of July. And it was written by, and it's just so sad, Marianne Satrapi. She just passed away. And the bio says she passed away out of sadness. She lost her husband a couple years ago. Anyways, but it's a good book. It's a graphic novel, and it's about a Iranian girl, and it's obviously been banned.
Yeah. Backing up from that though, because you were talking about Pride Month, which we're currently in.
Yes.
And that's for July. Is the book we read this month is Mad Honey, which is a great book.
Really
if
good.
You are
wait to talk about it.
I know I can't wait to talk about it too, but if you are a white woman out there who has maybe some internal questions about LGBTQ plus people, and you are
trans people,
that's LGBTQ.
Oh yeah, but specifically trans. I was just thinking. Yeah.
Karen, don't ruin the book again for people. This is what I was trying.
Actually, I talked to someone who just read the book, and they said they shouldn't feel bad about that or whatever. It's after the book club. What can we say?
I know, but for listeners who didn't read it ahead of time, for context, when I read this book, Karen ruined the ending for me. And so I was trying to politely hint that it's an LGBTQ book without giving away the plot line.
Got it.
Point is, if you are a white woman out there and you still feel shameful about maybe some of the questions you have, I think this book, what I love about this book, it does a really good job of breaking down maybe some of people's internal curious and intentionally like good, not curious in a negative way, but like curious thoughts that a lot of, I think, especially middle-aged white women might have around this subject. And they do a really good job of breaking that down from like an internal first-person narrative. And so I just think it's a really good book for people to read, especially if you're not exposed to LGBTQ people in your life, I think it's a good starting place to answer questions.
Yeah, I think Jodi Picoult, I think it's a must read for every middle-aged white woman. I really do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's better. I was trying to beat around the bush and nicely say, but you're right. Yeah. As the middle-aged white woman, you could say,
I can say
every middle-aged white woman should read this book. And
I can say it. I can say that. Yeah. Isn't that something we've learned? Okay. Reflection. We have to do reflection.
Yes. Well, we don't actually have to do reflection.
I have to.
No.
Oh, because you're going to do that. You're going to extend.
Because, as I promised everyone, I am doing an extension episode.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I've had some really, really good thoughts about how we ended last week.
Love it.
We kind of both agreed to disagree.
Yeah.
And I think I'm moving a little, this is what's so great about this podcast, is I'm understanding more of what I perhaps did not understand before. So anyways, then why don't you start, or do you want me to reflect?
No. I would love to kick us off, and then you can reflect. And so I agree with you. This is why I love this podcast. I think not only has it given us a space for conversations with parentheses around them, like there's end marks, there's beginning and end marks to our conversations. Yeah. So we don't end up killing each other.
Maybe that's actually healthy. We've talked about like how to help people have conversations. Maybe set a time limit. Ours is a half hour. And so maybe it's worth, when you first start trying to get back into relationships that may feel a bit divided, maybe just say, hey, let's do 10 minutes. Let's do 15. No matter where we end, let's just do that long. And then we can, because I think one of the things that I've learned a lot from our conversation is typically I'll present an idea, and I think I'm presenting an idea in one way. And then after hearing your point of view, I spend time over the week reflecting on what it is that we said. And I often change my mind.
Well, and I think this
because I have my kind of inherited bias initially going into the conversation. I get your thoughts, and then I reflect and think differently.
Yes. And what I was going to say, what I love about these bookends that, I guess I'm talking about, and this is not in my topic. This is what I was just thinking about right now, though. But these bookends in this conversation is when we used to have these conversations all the time without a mic, and without recording equipment, sometimes they would end very heated, and sometimes they would end in a place where we couldn't find the right ending. We couldn't agree to disagree because, again, there weren't these bookends. And it was interesting. Even last week, we both ended a little bit we stopped recording, and we kind of joked about oh, they were so close, but little did they know it was a podcast that ruined their relationship for a lifetime, and they never spoke again.
Because I kind of felt like you didn't understand what I was saying, and yet the week has gone on, and I realized I don't think I understood what I was saying, or I see it differently now.
Well, and so anyways, but my point is, we were able to laugh our tension off because we knew it was part of a bookend. We knew it was for the intent of this conversation. It wasn't, whereas in the past, I think we would take some of these as personal, jabs at each other. And we didn't have that, which was, I think, really great. And so anyway, so I think that's a really good point too. But it also led me to reflect. And another thing that we have, which we're really lucky now for our conversations, we have recordings of them.
Yeah.
So we can go back and listen and see where maybe we didn't hear something the first time, maybe, whatever that may be. And so I went back and listened, and I will agree, I noticed you had a really great opening last time. I think your opening was thoughtful, well-researched, really interesting, but I got so fixated, and this is my neurodivergent self, I got so fixated on the previous conversation we had on this topic that I couldn't move past that kind of thing. And I think it's because you asked us the same question, but I realized your setup was different. Like you had said, the setup was different. I just didn't hear that at the time. And so I want to say I think you did a really great job. I want to apologize if I
Wow. Janelle has such a good memory. So often when we go back and reflect on conversations, I will just trust that the way in which I said it was accurate to your memory. And so that makes me feel good because I think my intention was there, but I don't think I did. Well, we'll talk.
Yeah.
But I do want to say one thing. I really appreciate
I agree with you on my memory, but the reason why I went back is because I know I almost went into like complete not listening mode. Like all of a sudden I know during that episode in my head, I was so focused that I wasn't even fully listening to the things you were saying. And so that's why I knew I needed to go back because I was I don't think I captured everything she was trying to say. And I think you had a really well-researched opening. I want to say that.
Interesting that you should say that because that is one of the first things that we've learned about. And I do this all the time, so I'm not trying to shame you, but I'm trying to call it out, is when as people in conversations, we often think about what it is that we're going to say in the conversation in response, when in fact, what we've learned is to stop and listen, then form what we want to say. Very hard to do if you're not in the habit of doing it. But you're better at it than I am. And I've watched other people who I think are really good at it. You can actually even see them stop, contemplate how they're going to reframe the thoughts, and then respond. Anyway, so
that's not what I was doing.
Oh.
I wasn't listening to respond. I got lost in my head of
got it.
Of a whole swirl of we've done this topic. We didn't land anywhere. Like it was like a whole situation.
Yeah.
So I wasn't not even listening, not to respond. I literally just lost myself in
like why is she bringing this up?
Totally. Yeah. Anyways, so starting with that, I am also starting with I still disagree.
Yeah. I think I disagree with what I was saying too. Yeah.
But I couldn't figure out the articulation until I walked away and reflected. And so I have a lot of points, but we can hear yours. I think the big reflection that I had that I think differentiates this conversation a little bit is culture is not the right term. We live in white dominated culture. That is the instance. I think what you're hearing on TikTok is what I said last time. It's not find your culture. It's just get out of our culture. And because we live in such dominance, we can't separate that our dominant culture that we have built on our whiteness and our privilege is that we want the individualism. And there's even been this study of there's been a resurgence of the small town America as now a culture being built. And that, like, again, celebrating whiteness, but probably not in a positive impact. I think, and you were hitting on this a little bit with values, like finding a value system. Like, I agree with you around, but connecting value system and culture in the same way, I don't think it was accurate. I think what we're looking for is the term heritage and stuff. Heritage
absolutely.
Culture. And so heritage now brings in the food that you were talking about. Heritage, because your heritage could be Midwestern food. Your heritage could also be, you're from Canada and you like those can be more heritage speaking conversations versus culture. Because I think when we bring in culture, and now I'm not saying for other ethnicities and other cultures, I'm talking specifically within white culture in the US, which is the dominated power. So that's kind of where I wanted to start my differentiator. But I'll have you then connect on your reflection, then we can kind of go in to some of the like, I guess, research that I have found.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you articulating the idea that I was looking at some values of heritage, because I definitely walked away saying, oh, I'm mixing these two together. I'm mixing heritage and culture.
Yeah.
Although part of my heritage has moved into my culture. So, and I think in what you were saying and what we were talking about and responding positively to what you're saying is, I think I was probably more comfortable staying at heritage.
Yeah.
Because as I started thinking about my culture, especially in the knowledge I had, the knowledge that I now have, which my culture eliminated a lot of points of view of other people, it is sad.
Yeah.
It is sad. And so, but I think one of the things, this is where I want to agree to disagree, is you said something like, well, we don't have a culture. The truth is everyone has a culture. And so what I want to say, okay, so let's just start with the definition of culture.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, great. Go. Do you have that?
Yeah.
I don't have that.
The definition of culture is shared beliefs.
Yeah.
Shared values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that characterize a group or society. So one culture that I know well.
Really quickly, stepping back,
Yeah.
I don't believe I said white people have no culture.
Okay.
I believe, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, that's not what I meant then.
Okay.
I meant we have a dominant culture. If I had said that, what I meant is white people don't have a culture in the sense that you are speaking to culture.
Yes.
That's what
I'm speaking from a language of heritage. Yes. And so I think you're absolutely right. You early when you introduced us, you said something about no culture, individualism. I think.
Oh no, I'm talking about
right.
that was referencing to you saying that you're students or a lot of white people. I don't agree with that, but a lot of white people say we don't have culture. Your students are saying we don't have culture because there's this desire for individualism. But we do actually have a white culture. It's the dominant culture.
Yeah. But I think it's really important that we spend some time reflecting on where we sit within what our dominant culture is, because all of us are slightly different. So let me give you an example. I took a friend out to lunch with another person this past week, and this other person grew up she's indigenous. She's interesting. She mixes culture. One of her families from the South, her mother's from the South, and her dad is indigenous. And so she kind of adopts certain things from both spaces. But another person at the lunch was more similar to me. She came up in a Protestant, white, middle-class family. And we started talking about a few things that we did not need to give context to. And we understood each other.
Yeah.
Where our friend who didn't grow up in that same space, we needed to fill in with context. And so I do think that that's a space where we understand culture.
100%. Right? Culture is about norms. That is not what I'm disagreeing with here. Yeah. My point is, when you were having your students and when you were trying to determine and find your culture, when you were talking to your students to find ways to find their culture, they were finding value systems and they were finding heritage. Yeah. And I don't want that to be misconstrued with white culture. Okay. Because I think what then happens is, again, we bring more dominance in a space that white people don't need the dominance. I think it's very fine to break down norms, cultural norms, but again, recognizing that the cultural norms of the United States are white cultural norms, and they're dominated by white people.
Yeah.
No, they still are.
They still are. They are assumed the ones that we should assimilate to. Okay, exactly. Let's back this up. Unless you have some data that you want to reflect on.
Well, this is not where my topic was going, so you can
go for it.
No. If you have some things that you want to
I think we need to back this up in the sense that how this came about was there has been several TikTok artists recently that have said, white people, get your own culture, don't take ours. And so one of the things that my desire and actually did really then again happen, and I would love to explain this a little bit more, is sitting down and reflecting on what are my shared beliefs, my shared values, my shared customs. What is my not my culture, so that I can enter these conversations with knowledge. And you're right. A lot of times I don't want to look at my culture because now, but I don't want to diss it either, in the sense we don't grow unless we interrogate, unless we look at things. So this is why I do want us, at least myself, to look at my culture. So go on. I've got lots more to say about this, but
I agree with that. I still think you're leading towards the point, but then you're taking a turn. I agree the TikTokers are saying get out of our culture. White people appropriate other cultures all of the time. Simply for what I said is because we don't see our white dominant space as our culture, so we want to define individualism, and we do that by taking over other people's cultures. Or, we also there's just so many ways.
And I agree.
Appropriate. And so, but I think more of these statements I think the clear statement is get out of our culture. It's not go find your own. I mean, it's go find your own so you do something, but
you can't get out of something unless you know what you're leaving. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
but that's two different points.
Yeah.
You can't. Yes, I agree. So identifying and understanding what cultural appropriation is key, and that's what you're saying right now, is you can't get out of that until you understand how you're culturally appropriating. But that is very different.
Or where you're coming from,
that is very different than also seeking out white culture and defining.
So what would you say your culture
for yourself? I've been saying it several times. It is the white dominated social norms of the U.S.
And what are those?
Honestly,
but the thing is,
patriarchal systems, it's politeness, it's passive aggressiveness, it's bland food, there's so many things.
Well, this is the point. It's identifying those points.
But this is not the point, because if this was the point, then you would tell your students to embrace that. But instead, you're telling your students to go find something positive. And that's the thing is. And so this is why, and so it's hard. A lot of times we don't want to embrace, especially if we are more progressive, we don't want to embrace the white dominant culture. Now,
so then we just ignore it. We don't.
So then we ignore it. Exactly. And this is what I'm trying to say is, by substituting it with value systems or heritage, it completely misses the point of us having to stand in the uncomfortability of this is white dominated culture. And now you have people who are proud of that. Like I said, there's this study on someone did a study in 2025, I can't find it, called the racial resurgence or something, or the cultural resurgence, talking about how white culture is now being packaged in this small town America values kind of thing. And so those, and to be fair though, that is white culture. To be fair, that is white culture. That those are the social norms of white privilege that we have been built upon. The kindness, the quote unquote the control of that. So that is that. But people who are progressive don't want to claim that because we understand that that is that's icky. Like, we don't enjoy that. And so that's why it's this space of, we don't really want to claim our white culture. Now, I did hear a very interesting study by Allie Michael and Beverly Daniel Tatum. It's how can I have a positive racial identity if I'm white? And so what they call is the fourth way to be white. So the fourth option is anti-racist white identity. So you can claim the lineage of your white people who resisted white racism, not white pride, not guilt, not an identity that you can actually be proud to grow into. So that's what they're saying is focus your identity on identity of inclusion, on an identity of anti-racism. And so there is a white subculture within the US.
This is interesting that you use the word subculture, because I was going to say maybe what we're actually really talking about is looking at our subcultures, because I'm going to give you my story in a bit about my culture, and I'm going to talk about how looking at my culture also opened me up to other things.
That's the key thing, subculture. And so again, it's identifying, we talk time and time again, words matter.
Yeah.
So understanding your value systems, and like you said, we talked about value systems of your students, and they value, well, actually, even the value systems are different than how you described it. I would say subculture is more how you describe it. Shared value systems, but but the soccer culture that you described, the artist community that you described, those are all subcultures within, and those are all the value systems that your students can individually describe to. The white culture, when you're talking about race or ethnic culture, this is white culture. Like, there's no movement about it. White culture is the dominant, unfortunately, mostly racist, passive-aggressive, patriarchal space, capitalist space that we
I think the reason white culture is this way is because we allowed ourselves to be complicit, and we did not really look at, we just thought everyone was doing this. And so, okay, can I tell you, do we have time for me to share?
I think I know it's funny, listeners, also because we're using a different system today. I realize I don't have my clock up to watch us. Not that you would know in the last couple episodes that we even have a clock that we watch.
Yeah. But okay, yes. So I wanna share. So after our reflection, I thought a lot about exactly what you said. Am I looking at heritage or am I looking at culture?
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of yes and, right? So my story is I was only first and second generation from my German family.
Yeah.
So in my culture, heritage still played a role because there was German being spoken in the family. We knew exactly why our ancestors were German Lutherans because of why they came over to the United States versus why, the persecution and so forth. We understood why we became, Lutherans versus Catholic, and it was spoken about. So in that respect, I understand, like, my first and second generation students, most of my students are now coming over from Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. They're not coming from, Europe per se. A couple of them are, but I understand where those kind of heritage parts play a role in their culture. So, for example, I could talk about sauerkraut, and all my friends knew about sauerkraut because that's the foods we were eating. Yes. Make sense? So I could see how I was mixing heritage with culture because I went to a German Lutheran school, all of that kind of stuff. But and I can see how your generation is farther away from that, because even though we might have some German foods like Dad's beef rouladen, we don't have a lot of it.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot.
And if you look at that comparison of heritage versus then actually living in the culture of Germany.
Yes.
That culture is beyond, it's also social norms. It's also value systems.
Yes.
It's beyond what your heritage
it moved into the United States, right?
Yes.
And so then the other part
that's
of
not what I said.
Well, no, like that.
The heritage moved into the United States, but the cultural norms didn't. And that's the difference of the culture. Yes. So that's why going to Germany and saying, oh, I have German culture, and an actual German living in Germany is like, no, that's not your.
I found some
German heritage.
I found some very comfortable roots when we went there.
Yes.
And yet there's so many things I don't understand. Yeah. Okay, but I want to go farther. So I can see where I had that. And yet, because a lot of my community was like people had moved, first, second, maybe third generation Germans.
Yeah.
But the second part was I grew up in a suburb. I grew up in a suburb of a large city, Chicago. Things that so I started looking at what was cultural norms in that suburb, different than, say, if I had grown up in the city. For example, I could ride my bike to my friend's house at any time. We all had curfews, but I could safely ride my bike anytime to my friend's house. We all had bikes. We all rode to each other's house. We didn't lock our doors.
Yeah.
We all kind of had the same kind of weird, like, marshmallow Jell-O molds at parties. We all had very similar birthday parties. They lasted the same length. There was a very familiar way in which we did things. Everyone went to church. Just about everyone. 99% of the community went to church on Sunday mornings. So all the stores were shut. That's definitely part of my culture. So now I was starting to think about that. How was that? What built that culture, right? This is why I think getting to know our culture, especially in the context of our conversation of white women waking up, is really important, because while I was nested in safety and taxes were going to my community, there was nice parks. There was enough teachers to service my community. There were hospitals. There were roads. That's the culture I grew up in. I could end up nurturing my individuality versus I could nurture whether I liked tennis, because there were tennis courts that were well groomed. We now know that culture was built on the backs of other people. We now know, I didn't know this then. I just thought everyone was living this way, and this protected safety bubble. I didn't know that. I didn't know that there were other communities. Maybe you were starving in a different country, but I didn't know that perhaps there was, 10 miles away, there was a area of Chicago that was impoverished, not doing what I was doing. I mean, I knew, but I didn't know.
Well, that's
the complicitness, and that's the part. This is why I think getting to know our culture is really important. That was such a shared norm with me and my friends, right? We could walk into someone's house and just have their food or their parents, that sort of thing. And yet, now that I know what I know, what was missing in my culture?
That is a very different thing than you were trying to do last week. So I think
exactly.
And so I think setting that up because I agree, knowing our knowing the cultural norms that we have, knowing our dominant culture, knowing subcultures, and how we and our ideologies are formed is very important. Understanding the history of how that is built, especially how it is, created privileges and advantages for white people, very important. Unfortunately, I think the exercise, like, again, not to harbor on it, last week was again celebrating and that's where I was uncomfortable. It was
Yeah.
celebrating a almost false white culture. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you're not recognizing that you're the dominant culture, so
Yeah.
let's find a space for you.
Well,
Instead of doing the education, like you said, of this is where we're at and understanding the systems that built this.
so one of the things that I think after we walked away from our conversation last week, I did want to reflect on what my culture was. And there's a beauty to that culture.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not everyone's getting that culture, getting that safety value. So now, is there a way? And I don't know what that looks like.
And to
I'm
be
not.
honest, I would even argue there's not a beauty to that culture. Like, this is where I guess my generation and why this triggers me is because that is the
Well,
same
you see
that
both
is the
sides.
that is the
You see
same. I
both
see both
sides.
sides. That is the
Yeah.
same thing as people are saying nowadays with small town values, the beauty
Yeah.
of small town values. But I see the exclusivity, the ignorance,
Yeah.
the hate in small town values. And so in the same way that you were talking about this nostalgia of this white suburban subculture that you grew up with, I I see the back end, like you even said, of what built that culture so you could have that
Yeah.
safety, you could have that bubble. And so, but so that's again, I think what I'm trying to talk about with this white culture is I don't want to bring negativity to people and this is why I like the word heritage better. Because I
Yeah.
do think heritage brings up more of the food, more of the this than pointing out than kind of glorifying or putting these white cultures on a pedestal
Yeah.
instead of recognizing the harm that we've created. So like embrace the Midwestern marshmallow nasty salad that you loved kind of thing. Embrace that this is like what built you, but you don't need to
Well, I definitely
not
don't
you,
need to say
we.
it's the only way. Even as I was saying, is there a way that everyone could have that? But I don't want everyone to have what I
Ignorant.
had. I want everyone to feel safe.
Yeah.
That's the part so if we start looking at our
But that's
culture.
ignorance of white privilege.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
ignorance of the system that we built. And so this is what I keep saying, like, we're not, unfortunately, it's so many people think it's being negative, it's not, it's focusing on so then we can build better. This
Yeah.
is what the fourth type of whiteness is it's not hating on it, but it's also not glorifying it.
Yeah.
And it's building and
And
utilizing
not
your
making
whiteness
everyone
better.
assimilate to it.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Janelle.
But
I
also
interrupted.
recognizing your power and
Yeah.
using that power for anti-racism,
Yeah.
using that power to lift up other cultures, to lift up and bring in other norms, like you said, not assimilating. And so I think it's interesting. One thing that I was kind of loving, but I always love bell hooks, as we know. But bell hooks definitely talked about how, like, when white women or white people in general feel empty, they reach for someone else's culture like it's a spice. Like, and then so again, Lauren Michael, who's part of this, the fourth way, like, it's actually like a way to fix that hunger is to give you something real to be and stop eating everyone else's spice or food and stop trying to be everyone else.
So what
Embrace
is that?
it.
What would be one way to become that real bee?
Well,
That
but it's the
in yourself.
anti-racism. It's embracing the dark sides of our white culture.
Yeah.
It's what you're trying to say is recognizing and understanding our white culture, but not glorifying it. Still understanding like how it built you. Like, so you like, so I think what I hear what you're trying to say with this is because you have that privilege, it built you with a sense of confidence. It built you with a sense of security. It built you with a sense of safety. And that is the person you've grown in today who can then now speak up for people who don't maybe have safety, security. And so instead of saying like, oh, I want that for people, which you didn't say, but like you want that life for people, you recognize the benefits that that life gave you, but you also recognize, as you said, the backs of the people it was built on. And so then you can now do the anti-racist work to help secure that without appropriating someone else's culture, without, utilizing your resources, your privilege, your power to do better.
Yeah. So to summarize, I think it's okay to look back at our heritage, but call it our heritage. And then looking at the location in which we were born into, looking at some of the shared values as part of our culture, but seeing, especially for white people, who built, whose back we built that culture on.
And again, and it's still recognizing your culture as a white person. It is really recognizing, but it's dropping the shame. And it's dropping your shame around it, but just having an understanding. And then you, like you said, you build belonging through your chosen values, your heritage story, but you stay out of the cultures that were never meant for us. Like that's how we kind of change and make meaning.
Well, okay, can I ask you something though real quickly when it says stay out of the cultures that weren't meant for us? I think if we viewed life as a big giant party, okay, I'm who I am. I'm learning more and more about my own heritage, my own culture, my own shared values with this a group of people. And yet, if I'm invited in to some sort of beautiful party that shared someone else's culture, I can be part of that party. I just can't say it's my culture.
That's a great distinction.
And it's funny because when we got the privilege of going to that amazing wedding in France. And they, according to what we understand, this particular French culture does weddings very differently than we do.
US.
I would never say that would be an American wedding. I always say that was a French wedding.
Well,
and so I wouldn't take credit for it, but I certainly enjoyed being invited to it.
And there we go. That's the distinction. But I think often people miss that mark and they see trends. They see it's back to the girl with the cornrows that I talked about last week. And the appropriation is being invited in and celebrating someone's culture with them is very different than owning. And I think the wedding, great example of like, you would never come back and then do a wedding like that and claim, oh, it's my idea. It's mine. I've thought about this. Like no one else has thought about this before. And so I think there is this distinction of like, okay, when you're in the US, it is a white dominated culture, and therefore taking other pieces from other people's cultures that are not yours is appropriation. Now, if you were to go live in Thailand for years and you start to embrace Thai culture, I think that is a very different thing because you are now embracing the dominated culture of that society. And so it's no longer assimilation because you are immersed in it. You're part of it. But if you come back to the US and you start, owning that Thai stuff as your own, that is very different for a white person to do in the US in a white dominated culture. So I hope that helps distinguish for people, or you have questions?
No, I'm just thinking I'm going to end it. Now I'm going to piss you off. I can see how my generation just thinks your generation is complicated because that's like a lot of back and forth. The
It's
point
not
is,
complicated. It boils down to respect. This is what drives me crazy about your generation.
It's exactly
Kind of like pronouns.
Yeah.
Like it's like how people are like, oh, it's so complicated. It's not complicated. It's actually pretty easy.
It's disrespect.
And it
boils down to respect. And it also boils down to, yes, this is the group I share values with, you know, and understanding who they are and what it is and where it comes from. And yeah.
Put it this way, don't overthink it. If you feel like there might be a question, don't do it.
On that note, okay, let's exit. Thanks for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparked something in you, whether it's reflection, a new question, or a deeper commitment to showing up with empathy and accountability. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can also connect with us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Substack, or at whitewomenwakeup.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, be open, and let's keep waking up together.
Okay. Bye. Really quickly, though, before we go, a quick playback on where today's research came from. The idea that there are only 3 dead-end ways to be white and that we all need a 4th anti-racist one is from Beverly Daniel Tatum and then built out by educator Allie Michael in her work on white children and race. The Great Return by Bell Hooks gave us the Eating the Other, and then also Ruth Franklin, the picture of white culture being recentered right now, is also featured in Whitney Dunlap Fowler's The Great Return. And closing question on Toni Morrison, I butchered these, but anyways, we will link this in our show notes and we will have a Substack to follow up for additional perspectives on this topic. So thank you again and keep waking up. Bye.